Hello, my name is Vicky Lam and I'm a publishing editor with Elsevier Health Sciences in Asia Pacific. In this talk, I will give you a brief overview of scientific language and the most common errors that we encounter. The key to scientific language is to write clearly, objectively, accurately and concisely. The most common errors are as follows, and I will go into each one in the subsequent slides. Poor sentence construction, incorrect tenses, bad grammar, and inconsistent use of English throughout the manuscript. Sentences should be constructed in short factual bursts. Long sentences will confuse readers as they can be hard to follow. The average length of sentences in scientific writing is about 12 to 17 words. Generally speaking, only one idea or piece of information should be conveyed per sentence, so avoid cramming multiple statements into a single sentence. Also, avoid circular sentences that circle back on itself. For example, in this sentence, the reason for the experiment is described twice in slightly different terms, and I've used orange font to highlight the text you should note. The example given here is an extreme, but unfortunately not rare case of a very long sentence. If you try to read this, it may take you some time before you can understand what the author is trying to say. In fact, it took me about 20 minutes before I could try to rewrite this using 3 shorter, clearer sentences, which I've shown here on the slide. But still, I'm not sure if I have understood the author's meaning correctly. With regard to tenses, the present tense should be used for known facts, hypotheses, and previously published work. For example, the average life of a honeybee is 6 weeks. The past tense should be used when describing experiments that have been conducted, such as when you are writing the methods section of your manuscript. For example, all the honeybees were maintained in an environment with a constant temperature of 23 degrees Celsius. The past tense should also be used when describing the results of an experiment, such as when you are writing the results section of your manuscript. For example, the average lifespan of honeybees in a contained environment was 8 weeks. And use the past tense when you are describing specific work by others. For example, Wang et al.'s 2011 study showed that. Now, there are cases when using different tenses in the same sentence should be avoided, and cases where you will need to do so. It must be evaluated on a case-by-case basis using the rules that I provided on the previous slide. In the first example, the past and present tenses are incorrectly used in the same sentence. As this sentence is describing the experiment conducted in the present study, only the past tense should be used. In this second example, the past and present tenses are correctly used in the same sentence. The past tense is first used to refer to a specific work by others. In this case, the specific work is Lindsay et al. In 1991. And then the present tense is used to describe the previously published finding. In this case, the previously published finding is children confuse the source of their memories more often than adults. Now we move on to grammar. A common error in grammar that we see is the overuse of the passive voice. Use of the passive voice should be moderated and strictly used in the methods section of a manuscript only. Otherwise, if it's appropriate, using the active voice will usually shorten sentences, which is what you should be aiming to do. And especially when you're demonstrating your own thoughts, you're encouraged to use the active voice freely. Here are some examples. It was found that would be better written as we found that. Carbon dioxide was consumed by the plant would be better written as the plant consumed carbon dioxide. Avoid using contractions such as these. Contractions should never be used in scientific writing. They should always be spelled out in full. And while we're on the subject of contractions, do not confuse IT'(s) with ITS. The first is a contraction of it is, and the latter is the possessive adjective and possessive pronoun form of the personal pronoun it. Minimize the use of commonplace adverbs such as however, furthermore, moreover, and the phrase in addition. I'm not saying that you should avoid using them altogether, but they do tend to be overused, so be alert and use them in moderation. I have seen papers where authors use these words to start every sentence in a paragraph. I would suggest that you limit the use of these adverbs to not more than once per paragraph, perhaps at the beginning of each paragraph. Delete redundant phrases that state the obvious, such as and references herein and in the present report. Check that your use of plural and singular forms of words match up correctly. Here is an example of incorrect usage, and here is the corrected version. Double check the usage of unfamiliar words or phrases. Do not rely on Google Translate, electronic dictionaries, or translation software, as they may offer ridiculous results. You need to understand the meaning and the usage of every word that you use in your manuscript. In general, always choose the shorter word over the longer word, and use simple phrases over more complicated ones. Ensure that you use English consistently throughout the entire manuscript. So this includes in figures, such as charts, graphs and photographs, and tables, as well as references. Other common errors in scientific language. Avoid using words with the same meaning in the same sentence, such as in these two examples you see on the slide. Never use etc. or and so on at the end of a sentence, as it leaves your reader guessing as to what you might mean. If you have other things in mind, write out your thought in full and don't use etc. or and so on. Check the use of hyphens. For example, calcium-regulated transcription has a slightly different meaning than calcium-regulated transcription. If you are going to use hyphenated phrases or terms in your manuscript, ensure that you use the hyphens consistently throughout your manuscript for the same meaning. Check the use of commas. In this sentence, to identify biomarkers of prostate cancer, we performed microarray analysis using custom cDNA arrays. The second comma should be deleted. If you noticed, when I was reading the sentence aloud, I had to take a breath after cancer, but I did not have to do so after the word analysis. So that's a good way to know when you should delete a comma, because the function of a comma in a sentence is to allow the reader to take a breath if they're reading it aloud. Ensure the correct use of the word which. In this sentence, data were normalized to the internal reference housekeeping gene actin, which showed the word which is incorrectly used to refer to actin rather than to the normalization of data. Avoid exaggeration. Saying that there was a massive decrease in the number of tumors following per oral administration of green tea to describe the result depicted in this bar chart is subjective. It is better to state the simple fact that you observed a decrease and then to give the p-value. Watch out for unbalanced sentences. Do the clauses on either side of compared with match up? In this sentence, expression levels of p53 in smokers were compared with non-smokers. The expression levels of P53 are being compared with non-smokers, which doesn't make sense. I assume that the author is comparing P53 expression levels in two different types of people, smokers and non-smokers. So it should be written as expression levels of P53 in smokers were compared with those in non-smokers. Another very common error we see is the incorrect use of the word respectively. Two corresponding lists with the same number of items in both lists are required. So, the use of respectively in this sentence is incorrect, while its use in this sentence is correct. If you use words like better, worse, more or less, which is used to compare one thing to another thing, then you must make sure that you write out your thought in full again, so that readers do not have to guess what you are comparing. Another common error we see is incomplete sentences, where the sentence comes to an abrupt end before any discernible point has been made. We tend to see these most often when the sentences are very long, as if the author hasn't realized that he or she hasn't finished making the point. So this is a very good reason why we should stick to short sentences in scientific writing. A summary then of scientific language. If the language prevents editors and reviewers from understanding the scientific content of your work, at best, publication will be delayed, and at worst, never published. Be sure to stick to the specifications given in the journal's guide for authors. Check your sentences, tenses, grammar, and English, and be sure that they are all correct. And if possible, have a skilled native English speaker or writer check your manuscript before you submit it. At the minimum, you should provide the best possible English that you can to give your manuscript a fair chance. And this concludes this talk on scientific language. Thank you.